High above the city, on the 54th floor of the John and Vance headquarters, Marcus John watched the frost crystallize on the triple-paned glass. Marcus was the chief financial officer, a man of spreadsheets, EBITDA margins, and ruthless efficiency. At 45, his hair was prematurely silver at the temples, a testament to 2 decades of corporate warfare. He adjusted his silk tie, his mind already calculating the risks of the upcoming merger. He was a man who believed in logic. He believed that every action had a predictable reaction, and that every debt must eventually be paid. "The car is downstairs, Mr. John," his assistant Sarah said through the intercom. "The gala starts in 20 minutes. Marcus grabbed his wool overcoat and descended. As he stepped out of the revolving doors, the roar of the city hit him. The screech of the L train, the honking of taxis, and that relentless, biting cold. He began to walk toward his waiting black sedan, but something caught his eye. Near the alleyway, huddled against a steam vent that offered more humidity than actual warmth, sat a woman. She was wrapped in a threadbare gray blanket, her face shielded by a hood. Beside her were 3 small children, tucked under a single oversized sleeping bag. The oldest, a boy around 8, was rubbing his sister's hands to keep them warm. Marcus usually walked past the homeless without a glance. It wasn't cruelty. It was a professional habit of filtering out noise. But as the woman looked up to adjust her daughter's hat, the street lamp caught her eyes. Time stopped. The sound of the city faded into a dull hum. Marcus felt a coldness in his chest that had nothing to do with the Chicago wind. He knew those eyes. They were almond-shaped, a deep amber hue he hadn't seen in 25 years. They were the eyes of the girl who had shared her lunch with him when he was a scholarship kid with nothing. They were the eyes of Clara Mitchell. The crowd of commuters surged around them, oblivious. Marcus stood frozen, his hand on the handle of the luxury car door. His driver, David, looked confused. "Sir, is everything all right?" Marcus didn't answer. He took a step toward the alley. The woman saw him coming and instinctively pulled her children closer, her expression shifting to one of wary defense. She didn't recognize the man in the $5,000 suit. She only saw a threat. "Clara," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. The woman froze. She squinted against the glare of the car's headlights. Do I know you?" "It's Marcus," he said, stepping closer, ignoring the slush soaking into his expensive leather shoes. "Marcus from East High. The boy you helped." Clara's breath hitched. She looked at him, really looked at him, and the realization hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes filled with tears that immediately froze on her cheeks. "Marcus?" In that moment, the powerful CFO disappeared. He was just a boy again, and she was the girl who had been his only friend. But the reality of the sidewalk was brutal. She was shivering, her children were hungry, and he was the man who had everything. The silence between them was heavy with 25 years of unspoken history. Marcus looked at the 3 children. They were pale, their lips slightly blue from the cold. The youngest, a girl no older than 4, was clutching a tattered teddy bear. "What happened, Clara?" Marcus asked, his voice low and urgent. Clara looked down at her children, a flicker of shame crossing her face. "Life, Marcus. It happens fast. My husband passed away 3 years ago. Medical bills took the house. I tried to keep up, but the retail job wasn't enough for the rent. We've been moving between shelters for 6 months. They're all full tonight." Marcus felt a surge of anger, not at her, but at the world. He thought of his own penthouse, empty and heated, filled with furniture he rarely sat on. He thought of the millions of dollars he moved between accounts every day with a single click. "Sir, we're going to be late for the board presentation," David, the driver, reminded him gently, standing by the open car door. Marcus looked at the car, then back at Clara. The crowd, the wealthy donors and corporate executives he was supposed to meet, seemed like ghosts. They weren't real. This was real. The shivering children were real. "Forget the gala," Marcus said firmly. David blinked in surprise. "Sir?" "Call the organizers. Tell them I had a family emergency. Then help me with these bags." The people passing by began to stop and stare. It wasn't every day you saw a high-profile executive kneeling in the dirt next to a homeless family. Someone pulled out a phone to record. Marcus didn't care. He helped the 8-year-old boy, Leo, stand up. "Come with me," Marcus said to Clara. "All of you. Get in the car." Clara hesitated. "Marcus, I can't. I don't want charity." "This isn't charity, Clara," Marcus said, his eyes intense. "In 1998, when my father was in prison and I hadn't eaten in 2 days, you gave me your sandwich every single day for a month. You told me I was going to be someone. You invested in me when I had a 0% chance of success. Consider this the interest on that investment." With trembling hands, Clara gathered her belongings, 2 plastic bags and a backpack. Marcus took the bags from her. He guided the children into the plush, heated interior of the Cadillac Escalade. The kids looked at the leather seats as if they were made of gold. As the car pulled away from the curb, Marcus looked back at the steam vent. He realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about a profit margin. He was thinking about how to save a life. The drive to Marcus's apartment was silent, save for the sound of the heater humming at full blast. The children were wide-eyed, watching the city lights blur past the windows. Clara sat stiffly, her hands gripped tightly in her lap. She felt out of place, a ghost in a world of luxury. Marcus lived in a high-rise in the Gold Coast. When they arrived at the lobby, the doorman, Arthur, looked at the disheveled group with a mixture of confusion and professional restraint. "Good evening, Mr. John," Arthur said, his eyes lingering on Clara's worn coat. "Arthur, this is Mrs. Mitchell and her family. They are my guests. Please ensure no one disturbs us," Marcus said with a tone that brooked no argument. Inside the penthouse, the atmosphere changed. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the skyline, but the apartment felt cold in a different way. It was sterile. Marcus immediately went to the kitchen. "I'll order some food." "What do the kids like?" he asked. "Anything warm," Clara whispered. She was looking at a photograph on a side table. Marcus at a charity event, smiling but looking lonely. "You really did it, Marcus. You became the man you said you'd be." "I became a man who counts money, Clara. There's a difference," he replied, placing an order for a massive Italian dinner from a nearby restaurant. While they waited for the food, Marcus showed them the guest rooms. He brought out extra blankets and towels. He watched as Leo, the oldest, carefully placed his sister's teddy bear on a bed that probably cost more than their last 6 months of rent combined. "Go take a hot shower," Marcus told Clara. "I'll look after the kids. There are robes in the closet." When Clara emerged 20 minutes later, she looked different. The grime of the street was gone, but the exhaustion remained etched in her features. The food arrived. Bowls of steaming pasta, fresh bread, and roasted chicken. The children ate with a quiet, desperate intensity that made Marcus's heart ache. "Slow down, guys," Clara said gently. "There's plenty." As the children finally drifted off to sleep in the guest wing, Marcus and Clara sat in the living room. The only light came from the city glow outside. "What are you going to do, Marcus?" Clara asked. "You can't keep us here forever. The board, the press, they'll talk." "Let them talk," Marcus said. "I've spent my whole life worrying about what the board thinks. Tonight, for the first time, I'm doing something that makes sense to me." But the reality of the situation was starting to settle in. Marcus knew that a temporary roof wouldn't fix the systemic issues Clara faced. He needed a plan. He needed to be the CFO he was, strategic, thorough, and relentless. By the next morning, the video of Marcus helping Clara had gone viral. "CFO of John and Vance rescues homeless family" was the headline on local news blogs. The crowd, the public and the media, was fascinated. Marcus woke up to 50 missed calls. His CEO, Robert Vance, was among them. "Marcus, what the hell is going on?" Robert shouted through the phone. "The PR department is losing their minds. People are calling us the Compassionate Corporation, but the investors think you've had a breakdown. Why weren't you at the gala?" "I was doing something more important, Robert," Marcus said, sipping his coffee while watching the kids eat pancakes in his kitchen. "I'll be in at 10. We'll talk then." He hung up. He looked at Clara, who was reading the news on her phone with a look of horror. "They're talking about me," she said. "They're calling me the mystery woman. Marcus, this is too much. I don't want to be a spectacle." "You aren't a spectacle, Clara." You're a human being who was failed by a dozen systems, Marcus said. Today, we start fixing it. I've made some calls. I have a lawyer coming over to look at your husband's estate and the debt collection. I think there was foul play with the foreclosure. Clara shook her head. I can't pay for a lawyer. I already did, Marcus said. And I've contacted a private school for the kids. They start on Monday. Monday? Marcus, we don't even have clothes. We're going shopping, Marcus said with a rare smile. The shopping trip was an exercise in overwhelming kindness. Marcus took them to a department store, buying warm coats, sturdy boots, and school uniforms. He watched Leo pick out a backpack with a look of sheer disbelief. However, as they walked through the mall, Marcus noticed people pointing. The crowd was no longer just a backdrop. They were participants. A woman approached them, her eyes red. Are you the lady from the video? She asked Clara. Clara nodded tentatively. The woman handed her a small gift card. I was where you are 2 years ago. Don't let go of his hand. People like him are rare. Clara started to realize that Marcus wasn't just giving her money. He was giving her back her dignity. But as the day ended, a shadow appeared. A man in a gray suit was waiting near Marcus's car. Mr. John, the man said. I'm from the Department of Child Services. We received a report about children living in unsafe conditions. Marcus stepped in front of Clara and the kids. They are in my care. They are in the safest conditions in this city. The battle for Clara's future was no longer just about a warm bed. It was about to become a legal and social war. The presence of the DCS officer, Mr. Henderson, was a wake-up call. Realism dictated that a wealthy man couldn't just adopt a family off the street without the bureaucracy intervening. I understand your intentions, Mr. John, Henderson said, his notebook open. But Mrs. Mitchell has no permanent address, no proof of income, and the children have missed 3 months of school. By law, I have to evaluate if the children should be placed in temporary foster care. Clara let out a strangled sob. She pulled Leo and the younger ones to her side. No, please. I stayed awake every night to keep them safe. I never left them. Marcus felt a cold rage. This was the system he had supported. A system of rules that ignored the human heart. Mr. Henderson, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous corporate chill. I am the CFO of a multi-billion-dollar firm. As of this morning, Clara Mitchell is a consultant for my family office with a signed 5-year contract and a salary that puts her in the top 5% of earners in this city. Her permanent address is my guest suite until her new apartment is ready next week. Henderson blinked. A consultant? She has an intimate knowledge of logistics and survival in urban environments, Marcus lied fluently, though in his mind it was the truth. She is invaluable. Now, unless you want to explain to my legal team why you are harassing a high-level executive and his staff, I suggest you take my card and call my lawyer. The officer, intimidated by Marcus's stature and the sheer audacity of his claim, backed down for the moment. But the threat remained. That evening, Marcus sat with his legal team. They had discovered that the bank which foreclosed on Clara's home had skipped several mandatory notification steps. It was an illegal foreclosure, one of thousands handled by a robocalling law firm. We can get the house back, or at least a massive settlement, his lawyer said, but it will take months. I don't have months, Marcus said. I want her name cleared by Friday. Clara entered the office with tea. She heard the tail end of the conversation. Marcus, why are you doing all this? We haven't spoken in decades. You don't owe me this much. Marcus looked at his lawyers and gestured for them to leave. He stood up and walked to the window. When I was 16, my father was arrested for fraud, Marcus said quietly. Everyone at school stopped talking to me. The teachers looked at me like I was a thief in training. I used to sit in the back of the library so no one would see me crying. You were the only person who sat with me. You didn't ask questions. You just gave me half your apple and talked about the books you liked. He turned to her. You saved my soul back then, Clara. This is just money. It's the easiest thing I can give. The crowd at John and Vance was not as forgiving as the lady at the mall. On Thursday morning, Marcus walked into the boardroom to find the entire executive committee waiting for him. The stock price dipped 2 points this morning, Marcus, Robert Vance said, sliding a tablet across the table. Investors are worried about unpredictable behavior. They're seeing you on the news every night with this woman. There are rumors of a scandal. Marcus didn't sit down. He stood at the head of the table, looking at the men and women he had worked with for years. The unpredictable behavior you're referring to is called being a human being, Marcus said. The woman is Clara Mitchell. She is a victim of the very predatory lending practices that our subsidiary, John Credit, was involved in 3 years ago. A hush fell over the room. I've spent the last 48 hours auditing our foreclosure files, Marcus continued, his voice echoing. We were part of the problem. We made our year-end bonuses on the backs of families like hers. So, here is the deal. I am setting up a $10 million home recovery fund using my own performance bonus, and the company is going to match it. You can't be serious, a board member scoffed. The shareholders will revolt. If they revolt against a move that corrects a legal and moral error, then they aren't the kind of shareholders I want to work for, Marcus replied. And if you want my resignation, you can have it. But I'm taking my clients and my reputation with me. He knew he was gambling. His entire career was on the line. But for the first time in his life, he didn't care about the exit strategy. Robert Vance looked at Marcus for a long time. He saw something in his CFO's eyes that hadn't been there before. A spark of life. The fund is a good PR move, Robert said slowly. And Marcus is right about the legal liability. We match the fund. But Marcus, make sure she's taken care of. Privately. Marcus walked out of the room. He had won the first battle. But the emotional toll on Clara and the kids was growing. They were living in a golden cage, and the media was still circling. Friday arrived with a pale, wintry sun that struggled to pierce the Chicago fog. For the first time in years, Marcus wasn't checking the Nikkei index or the pre-market futures when he woke up. Instead, he was checking the square footage of a 3-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. It wasn't a penthouse. It didn't have the glass and steel coldness of his own residence. It had crown molding, creaky oak floors, and a kitchen that smelled of cedar and potential. It's too much, Marcus, Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. She stood in the center of the living room, her hands tucked into the sleeves of the new wool sweater he had bought her. The emptiness of the apartment felt vast, not because of its size, but because of the weight of the security it offered. The 3 children were a whirlwind of motion. Leo, usually the stoic protector, was running from room to room with his younger sisters, Maya and Chloe. They were debating which window had the best view of the park, their laughter echoing off the bare walls, a sound so foreign to the damp, muffled silence of the street shelters. It's a lease to own, Marcus explained, leaning against the doorframe watching them. The legal team found that the settlement from the bank for the illegal foreclosure will cover the purchase in full within 6 months. This isn't a gift, Clara. This is a restoration. It's your home. No one can take it from you. Not the banks, not the city, not the wind. Leo stopped running and walked up to Marcus. He looked up, his eyes searching Marcus's face with a wisdom no 8-year-old should possess. He reached out and tugged on Marcus's sleeve. Mr. Marcus? Are you a superhero, like in the movies? Marcus knelt, ignoring the slight ache in his knees and the dust on his trousers. He looked Leo directly in the eye. No, Leo. Superheroes have capes and magic. I'm just a man who forgot how to be a friend for a long time. I spent 20 years counting numbers and forgot how to count people. Your mom? She's the hero. She kept you guys safe and warm when the world was at its darkest. I'm just the guy who finally remembered where I put my heart. That afternoon was a blur of domesticity. They moved the few plastic bags they owned, now supplemented by boxes of new linens, kitchenware, and toys Marcus had ordered. As the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the clouds in shades of bruised purple and gold, they sat on the floor of the living room. They didn't have a table yet, so they used the pizza boxes as plates. For Marcus, the grease of the pepperoni and the cheap napkins felt more real than any 5-course gala dinner. He felt a sense of belonging that had eluded him in his lonely glass tower. But the peace was shattered by a sharp, rhythmic knocking at the door. It was David, Marcus's driver. Usually the picture of professional composure, David looked pale, his hand trembling slightly as he held his phone. Sir, you need to see this. It's on every local station. David walked to the wall-mounted TV Marcus had installed that morning and clicked it on. A local news investigative reporter was standing in front of Clara's old foreclosed home. The headline across the bottom of the screen read, "Charity or Calculated Play, the Dark Past of the CFO's Protege." The reporter spoke with a sensationalist bite. "We've dug into the history of Clara Mitchell, the woman rescued by John and Vance CFO Marcus John. Records show her late husband had mounting debts and legal troubles before his passing. Is this a case of a billionaire's misplaced sympathy? Or is Marcus John being manipulated by a professional grifter?" The screen flashed a photo of Clara from a month ago. Haggard, tear-streaked, clutching her children on a sidewalk. They had edited it to look as grim as possible. Then they showed a clip of Marcus helping her into the car, implying a romantic scandal. The crowd, the digital masses, was already reacting. David scrolled through the comments on the station's website. "She's using him," one read. "Why her? There are thousands of homeless. What makes her special? She's a scammer." Clara watched the screen, her face draining of color until she looked like a ghost. She slowly stood up, her pizza forgotten. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I knew they wouldn't just let us be. They want me back in the dirt, Marcus. That's where they think I belong." The children stopped eating, sensing the shift in the air. The joy in the room didn't just fade. It vanished, replaced by the familiar, suffocating cold of public shame. Marcus felt a surge of rage, a cold, calculating protectiveness. He realized then that giving her a house was just the beginning. He had built her a fortress, but he hadn't yet become the shield. The night was long and sleepless. Marcus sat in the dark of his own penthouse, watching the city lights. He knew how the corporate world worked. If you didn't control the narrative would destroy you. The crowd was a fickle beast. It craved blood just as much as it craved inspiration. He realized his silence was being interpreted as guilt. He had always avoided the press, preferring to be the shadow behind the spreadsheets, but now silence was a luxury he couldn't afford. The following morning, Marcus didn't call a press conference at the John and Vance headquarters. He didn't want the marble lobby and the security guards to act as a barrier. Instead, he called it at the back of the Yards Community Center, a weathered brick building in the neighborhood where he and Clara had grown up. The crowd, a swarm of reporters, camera crews, and local residents, packed into the cramped, echoing gym. The air smelled of floor wax and old basketballs. When Marcus walked onto the small wooden stage, a hush fell over the room. He wasn't wearing his $5,000 bespoke suit. He wore a simple navy sweater, dark jeans, and boots. He looked like the man he used to be, not the executive he had become. "I'm not here today as the chief financial officer of a global firm," he began, his voice steady but carrying a raw edge that silenced the murmuring reporters. "I'm here as Marcus John, a kid who grew up 4 blocks from this center, a kid who knew what it felt like to have a stomach growling from hunger while trying to study for a math test." He leaned into the microphone, his eyes scanning the cameras. "I've heard the word grifter used in the last 12 hours. I've seen photos of a woman at her lowest point used to generate clicks and add revenue. So let's talk about the truth. Let's talk about a debt." He told the story, not the polished corporate version, but the raw, stinging truth. He spoke about his father's arrest for embezzlement when Marcus was 16. He spoke about how the crowd of his youth, his friends, his teachers, had turned their backs on the thief's son. "I was a pariah," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly before he regained control. "I sat in the back of the school library because I didn't want anyone to see the holes in my shoes or the tears in my eyes. And there was one person, only one, who didn't care about the scandal. Clara Mitchell. Every day for a month, she sat with me. She shared her lunch with me. She told me that my father's mistakes weren't my own. She gave me the dignity I needed to keep going." He stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "The media is looking for a scandal? Here's the scandal. In a city with more wealth than some nations, a woman who worked 40 hours a week at a retail job, who cared for a dying husband, and who never once asked for a handout, ended up on a steam vent because our banking systems chose profit over people. My company's own subsidiaries were part of the machine that took her home." The reporters were scribbling furiously now. The grifter narrative was crumbling in real time. "I didn't rescue Clara," Marcus declared, his voice firm. I repaid a debt that has been accruing interest for 25 years. And to those who are harassing her or her children, understand this. Clara Mitchell is now under my protection. I have retained the best defamation and privacy attorneys in this country. If you follow her, if you photograph her children, if you spread lies about her husband's memory, you are no longer dealing with a homeless woman. You are dealing with me, and I have the resources to ensure you never hold a camera or a pen in this city again. The room was deathly silent. Then, from the back of the gym, an old woman started to clap, then another. Within seconds, the crowd, the very people the media tried to incite, stood and cheered. The narrative hadn't just shifted, it had been rewritten. When Marcus returned to the Lincoln Park apartment, Clara was standing by the door. She had watched the stream on her phone. She didn't say a word. She simply stepped forward and hugged him. A hug of pure, unfiltered relief. For the first time in years, the shield was holding. The months that followed were not a cinematic montage of instant happiness, but a period of quiet, painstaking reconstruction. Realism taught Marcus a lesson that no MBA program could. Trauma doesn't simply vanish because a bank account is full. It lingers in the way a person carries their shoulders, in the way they flinch at loud noises, and in the way they look at a full refrigerator with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Clara began her new life at The Bridge, a local nonprofit focused on housing security that Marcus had helped restructure. True to her character, she had refused a high-level executive position with a corner office. "I don't belong behind a mahogany desk, Marcus," she had told him. Instead, she became a senior caseworker. Every morning, she sat across from women who wore the same expression she had once worn, that hollow, thousand-yard stare of a mother who has run out of options. Clara didn't just give them forms to fill out. She gave them her own story. She knew how to navigate the cold bureaucracy of city housing, but more importantly, she knew how to look someone in the eye and make them feel seen. She wasn't a consultant in a corporate ledger anymore. She was a pillar of the community, a woman who had turned her scars into a roadmap for others. The children flourished in ways that brought Marcus to tears on more than one occasion. Leo, the boy who had once stood as a silent, grim sentinel over his sisters on a frozen sidewalk, became the star of his school's debate team. Marcus attended his first tournament in a cramped suburban high school gym. Watching Leo stand tall, articulating his points with a voice that no longer shook from the cold, Marcus felt a pride more profound than any successful merger. Leo was realizing that words could be used to build worlds rather than just survive them. Maya and Chloe regained the healthy glow in their cheeks. Their laughter, once muffled by the oppressive fear of being kicked out of a shelter, now rang through the Lincoln Park apartment. But the healing was messy and non-linear. There were nights when the phone would ring at 2 a.m., and Marcus would hear Clara's ragged breathing on the other end. She would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced the apartment was a vivid dream, and that any second she would open her eyes to the gray concrete of an alley. There were days when Marcus would visit and find that the children had hidden granola bars and fruit under their pillows, a lingering poverty brain habit from the days of scarcity, a reflex to stockpile against a future they still didn't quite trust. Marcus changed too. He stayed on as CFO of John & Vance, but the glass tower no longer defined his identity. He implemented a corporate social responsibility program that was ruthless in its efficiency, not for tax write-offs, but for actual systemic change. He challenged the board to audit their lending practices, effectively ending their association with predatory firms. Every Tuesday night, Marcus returned to the community center in his old neighborhood. He sat in a circle with teenagers who looked just like he did 30 years ago, angry, brilliant, and overlooked. He taught them financial literacy, not as a way to get rich, but as a way to gain freedom. He realized that his wealth wasn't a scoreboard to measure his worth against his peers. It was a toolkit to repair the world he had once tried to escape. He visited the Lincoln Park apartment every Sunday. It became his chosen family. They didn't talk about the stock market or global inflation. They talked about the mundane, beautiful details of a life reclaimed. Leo's upcoming history test, Maya's drawing of a sun that looked like a fried egg, and the small victory of Clara finally buying a plant and keeping it alive. One Sunday afternoon, while the kids were playing a spirited game of tag in the park across the street, Marcus and Clara sat on a weathered wooden bench, A thermos of hot coffee sat between them, sending curls of steam into the crisp air. The wind was cold, but it felt like a greeting, a reminder of where they had been, rather than the threat it once was. "You look different, Marcus," Clara said softly, her eyes following Leo as he sprinted across the grass. "The lines around your eyes, they aren't from staring at spreadsheets or stressing over margins anymore. They're from smiling. You look lighter." "I am happy, Clara," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I spent 20 years trying to outrun my past. I thought if I made enough money, if I climbed high enough, I could erase the memory of being that hungry kid in the library with the holes in his shoes. I forgot that the best part of that kid wasn't his ambition. It was the friend he had who shared her lunch." "We're both survivors, Marcus," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Her wool coat was thick, expensive, and warm, a stark contrast to the threadbare gray blanket of the year before. "But for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm bracing for a hit. It's nice not to have to survive alone anymore." There was no magic in their story. No lottery wins, no supernatural interventions. There was only the difficult, intentional, and beautiful process of two human beings choosing to look out for each other in a world that so often looks away. Exactly 1 year after that fateful night in the Chicago Loop, the city was once again gripped by a deep freeze. The wind off Lake Michigan was howling at 40 miles per hour, and the L trains screeched as they navigated the frozen tracks. The city felt brutal, yet Marcus John walked through it with a sense of purpose he had never known. Marcus was walking toward the grand ballroom of the Palmer House. This time, he wasn't attending a gala to network or to fulfill a social obligation. He was the host. The event was for the Mitchell John Home Recovery Fund, an initiative that, in just 12 months, had already placed over 200 families into permanent, stable housing. As his car slowed in the heavy theater district traffic, Marcus looked out the window. They were passing the exact block where he had found Clara. He saw the steam vent, its thick white plumes of vapor hissing into the night air. But there was no one huddled over it. Because of the fund's partnership with the city, the local emergency shelter capacity had doubled, and a new 24-hour intake center had opened just 2 blocks away. The noise he used to filter out was now the focus of his life's work. Marcus stepped into the ballroom. The crowd was there. The titans of industry, the politicians, the socialites in their silks and furs. But the atmosphere was fundamentally different. He hadn't invited them to show off his success. He had invited them to be challenged by his perspective. Clara was there, wearing a simple, elegant dark green dress. She wasn't hiding in a hood anymore. She stood tall, her hair styled, her amber eyes bright with a quiet, fierce purpose that outshone the crystal chandeliers above. She was a guest of honor. But more than that, she was the heartbeat of the evening. When it was time for her to speak, the room went so silent you could hear the distant, rhythmic hum of the building's heaters. Clara walked to the podium. She didn't use notes. She didn't need them. "1 year ago, I was invisible," Clara told the audience. Her voice didn't shake. It carried the resonance of a woman who had walked through fire and come out forged in steel. "Most of you in this room would have walked past me. You would have seen a homeless woman, a statistic, a social problem to be solved, or perhaps just a shadow to be avoided. One man didn't. Not because he was a superhero with a magic wand, but because he chose to remember who I was. He saw the person under the blanket." She looked directly at Marcus, who was sitting in the front row, his eyes glistening. "We all have debts," she continued, her voice rising. "Some are written in bank ledgers, in interest rates and mortgage contracts, but the most important debts are those written on the human heart. I encourage you tonight, not just to write a check, but to look for the people you've forgotten. Repay the debts of kindness you owe to those who helped you when you were at your lowest. Because the greatest wealth in this room isn't in your stock portfolios. It's in your capacity to see each other." The applause that followed wasn't the polite, rhythmic clapping of a corporate event. It was thunderous, emotional, and sustained. People weren't just cheering for a success story. They were cheering for the possibility of redemption in their own lives. After the gala, as the guests filtered out into the freezing night, Marcus and Clara walked out of the side entrance, away from the photographers. David was waiting with the car, the engine idling, the interior bathed in a warm, inviting amber light. "Where to, Mr. John?" David asked, holding the door open. Marcus looked at the snow falling softly under the streetlights of Michigan Avenue. The flakes were large and wet, clinging to the iron railings. He looked at Clara, who looked back at him with a smile that felt like home. "Let's just walk for a bit, David," Marcus said, pulling his gloves on. "It's a beautiful night, and for once the cold doesn't bother me at all." They walked down the sidewalk together, two friends who had conquered the ghosts of the past and built a future out of nothing but loyalty and shared lunch. The city lights twinkled like diamonds on the fresh snow, reflecting in the eyes of a man who had finally found his heart and a woman who had finally found her place in the world. The modern fairy tale was complete. It didn't end with a crown, a castle, or a magic spell. It ended with a warm hand to hold, a quiet sidewalk, and the simple, revolutionary promise that in this city, on this night, no one else would have to sleep on a steam vent.